So next, we're going to hear from three people who are working to make climate change a priority in cities across America. From working towards solutions as a matter of faith and justice to advocating for solutions to protect the health and well-being of children and their families, to inspiring and empowering mayors to act on climate. These three women will show us that we are the solution. So please join me in welcoming Sistah Jackie Dupont-Walker from the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Dr. Tait, former Chief Medical Officer of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Meis of Climate Mayors, in discussion with me. Hello and good morning. You know, Bob is right. Every person, every day can do something to be part of the solution to climate change. From the moment we wake up until the moment we fall asleep, there are 1,000 things we can all do to solve for climate change and make our lives better, no matter our life circumstances. We can take local action for a national purpose. So today I have three leaders who are leading the charge to do just that: spur climate action in local communities and also nationally and beyond. So they're going to share with us all that they are doing and what all of you joining today can do too. So please welcome Sistah Jackie Dupont-Walker, Dr. Tait, and Meis. Welcome, everyone. So let's start with the first question. Let's start with your why. Humans make decisions based on emotions, and these emotions are often rooted in answering the question of why. So tell us why you are leading on climate. Jackie, why don't we start with you? AME made a 2016 proclamation for climate justice. What led to that decision, and what drives your reasons still to this day?
Thank you, Meighen, and good morning to everyone. Very simple. An angel, we don't normally think of this person as an angel, called Bob Perkowitz, kept bugging me about the fact that this was important. And I work with communities that have so many other struggles, and often the people who are supposed to help them are doing just the opposite. But I was able to take Bob's nudging and urging and talk to some people who I was working with. And they said, yes, finally, one of our members in South Africa had told me she had put this in the Sunday school literature for children. And I knew it was time. And so for me, it brought home the tainted water, the contaminated dumps in our neighborhoods, the constant placing of toxic materials where we live and where we breathe, to understand that here was someone who understood that for future generations, it was already time.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Jackie. Fan, you led efforts to get the American Academy of Pediatrics and pediatricians to be visible and vocal leaders for climate action on behalf of the health and well-being of children, similar to what Jackie was talking about. Perhaps it is a leading question, and we've already answered, but tell us your why.
Thanks so much, Meighen. It's such a privilege to be here with you and with everyone in this meeting, and also with my two other panelists. It's an honor. So let's talk about children. I love it when I can cue up why this is so important to children and families, and we've just heard a little bit about that already. If we think in terms of children, what do we want for them? We want them to be happy and healthy, and ultimately have, I've said this before, but ultimately have a better life than we've had, right? Your parents wanted that. Your grandparents wanted that. And we want that. We want children to have a better life than we have right now. And part of that's health, part of that's thriving, but a lot of that has to do with the environment, which is what we're talking about right now. We heard what Bob said. So on one very basic level, and what you said too, climate change, we know this, right? You're on this call, you know that it's making the planet warmer. We just heard that. Ice caps are melting, sea levels are rising, and all of us now are dealing more every single day with disasters. And if we have not heard about those disasters, now we are living those disasters. And just to highlight what's happening, as Bob mentioned also, but I think about the fires, right? The tornadoes, the hurricanes, all of those things. If you're watching this, you know it. If you're not watching this, you know it. I talked to a lot of people who've said things have changed since we were children. I'm more seasoned, but since we were children, things have changed. We didn't see this, and you know it, and we know it. And I think that really speaks to what Meighen, you said, which is how many people know it's an issue, but don't believe other people know it. And we'll get to that as we talk more about that. So just quickly, children are not little adults. They're not little adults, right? They represent a uniquely vulnerable group, particularly if you're less than 5 years of age, but all children. So they breathe faster, they respond differently to heat. They're on the ground. If you have toddlers, think how they pick up things and put it in their mouths. They lick things. There's so many things. And children in under-resourced areas are at a greater disadvantage due to lifelong exposures. We know that children, and particularly young adults, and all of us, are experiencing climate anxiety. Right? We could spend time, and we won't go into all of it, but there are mental health issues that we're all dealing with along those lines. So when a child comes into the office to see a pediatrician, we see those climate changes too individually, like children who are having more trouble with asthma, right? Having more trouble breathing. So it doesn't have to be the big disaster. It can be everyday things that we're seeing. We could spend a lot of time talking about that. I think I'll stop there and just summarize. That's just a few of the reasons we're so concerned. Thanks.
That's a tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
Yes.
Thank you, Fan. Tait, climate mayors. It's all about the title, I guess, but why engage mayors, and what do they say is their why for leading on climate?
Well, I think about what Fan said about asthma, and for me, that's personally my why. I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley in California, and it's one of the places that consistently ranks as the poorest air quality. So very normal to look at the soccer field and see kids with inhalers. 1 in 4 kids where I grew up had asthma. My nephew was hospitalized multiple times before even turning 3. So seeing those impacts firsthand in my community was why I came to this work. And I think that's what mayors are experiencing as well. So we know that cities are the forefront of the sources of climate change, the impacts of climate change, but also the responses to climate change. Cities generate 80% of the world's GDP. They produce 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and house 50% of the world's population. So cities are absolutely instrumental when we look at both where the sources are coming from, but it's also, as Bob said, the solutions are increasing exponentially as well. And often they start at the city level because that is a scale where we can be really innovative and we can look at piloting new approaches, and they're really the test bed of our solutions on climate change that can scale out to the state, national, and global level. So that's really the why behind climate mayors.
We talked a little bit about, the fact that people are not speaking out or acting on the issue because they don't think others around them are concerned, and when they are. And that's really a hurdle. It's a psychological barrier. And so we're going to go next to hurdles. And what hurdles have you faced in your work, and how have you overcome them? And that's the important part. Fan, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Meighen. Well, we've identified some of those hurdles, right? We don't think that people are thinking like we are, right? We are afraid I think sometimes we're just afraid to bring it up and to talk about it. We don't want to insult people. Sometimes they're our families, right? we want to do it in the right way that'll make a difference and that we can work together to move forward. So I think one of the hurdles is just all of us having the courage we need and the knowledge we need to not only say it, but to say it in the best possible way so that we're not hurting or insulting anyone else, but we are being inclusive and together. I think we certainly have heard, we heard from Bob already, some of the other hurdles which have to do with policy, right? And if we're thinking about policy, it's not just federal or global policy, it's local policy, just like we're hearing with respect to the mayors in the communities. And so I think that we have to look at it at every single level. From a pediatric perspective, we talk about advocacy, that every time we see a child, we are that child's advocate and that family's advocate. And so we have to think about it, I think, at a family level, at a local community level, at a policy level, and at a national level.
Wonderful. Tait, talk to us about some hurdles you've faced and what you've done to overcome them.
Yeah, I think we've touched on a number of the hurdles as Fan said. I think Bob's percentage of people that believe in climate change and the much lower percent of 14 that we actually also think believe in climate change, that is what we're seeing at the city council level as well. So we're asking our leaders to make very, very hard, controversial decisions that sometimes do not benefit people who are currently benefiting from the paradigm that we're in and shifting away from fossil fuel industries, for example, where there's a lot of existing power in those industries. That is a hard thing for a leader to do. And those decisions have benefits that are felt over time and not always for the current voters. So as we look to the tough decisions we have to make now that benefit future generations who can't stand up and vote now. And that's why we're seeing so many of the amazing movements by the next generation of leaders. But there is a current political structure that doesn't support hard decision making, that the election cycles don't fit nicely within the time horizon of when these changes will need to happen and when we're going to actually see the investments we make now benefit over time. There are a lot of things that we can do now, the sort of low-hanging fruit stuff, the planting trees, the putting in bike lanes. Some of that's a little easier, less costly, but as we work towards the really, really challenging decisions we have to make to fully get to where we need to be to reduce our emissions, those are going to require more and more support for our local leaders because the system now is not set up to really provide that support.
They need to hear from their constituents. Jackie, talk to us about some of the hurdles you faced in your work and what you're doing to overcome them.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we often think of language translation literally, but for me, it is the translation of what is going on here in comparison to some of the other hurdles and priorities that are set in the faith community. And so we start with the interpretation of our scripture, and that which leads us to making this the highest priority. It starts with becoming the trusted voice in an arena where people are not comfortable with the language that is being used. I think even on the conference last year, some of the people that we invited came in with scholarships, were speaking from their heart. And they felt that that not the presenters, but the people in the room wanted them to just let us go on to our comfortable language. So we've got to open up in order to come in. And that's the hurdle. People say, well, they don't really care about what I care about. For example, there are communities where there have been promises made that there'd be reports about oil drilling and impact. Those reports aren't made. And to my sister in San Joaquin Valley's point of view, when you go to the politicians, it is not a community they want to respond to because they don't hear from them often. The faith community is struggling with how to be that voice in a list of things that need to be handled, like jobs, like homelessness, and the others. And so it's very important for us to keep this as a high priority because it does have long-lasting impact, but also for our seniors, many of whom say and can give you a list of promises made and not kept. And for us, that's the key piece. The hurdle is how do we prioritize having those promises kept? That is really an intergenerational commitment from those who we want to have longer life, but a good quality of life. And how do we keep them engaged as a voice? Our hurdle is how to keep this as a highest priority in the midst of all of things that churches believe they're called to do, to be beyond just the proclamation, but get up from your knees praying and take action.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that when we have our why and when we know that this is something that matters to us personally, and that it's not a separate issue, I think people can raise to the call. But they've got to know others are on their side, right? And so that's part of why we're here today. And you've heard a lot us using this every person, every day, and this idea of local action for a national purpose. And so talked about what you are doing to catalyze action in local communities and what you're doing to engage folks every day. Kate, why don't we start with you?
Well, it is my first full day on the job at Climate Mayor. So mostly I will be speaking of what I will be doing with them and what they've done in the past, and happy to represent that. I think what I love about being a part of ecoAmerica is just how you guys have brought together and the collective power of bringing voices together, whether that's the health community, the faith community, or being part of the Path to Positive community that I've been a part of. So that's what we're doing with the Climate Mayors as well, is pooling those voices together to have a more powerful impact. So an example, when former President Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord, that was when we saw a lot of growth and interest in the Climate Mayors. So we now have about 500 mayors that are engaged, but we had a huge desire for people to sign up to say, no, we're going to meet the intent of the Paris Accord. We're going to do that on behalf of the United States as mayors within this nation, even if our federal government isn't going to. And so that's the power of being able to work subnationally as well, is that when we don't have a federal leader, which we do now on climate change, but hasn't always been the case, but we can still keep that action going at the local level and continue to create those solutions that then can have support when we have someone like Biden in office. And so a lot of what we're going to be doing is working with the White House and with the administration to highlight those solutions, to show what we've learned over the many years that climate action has continued at the local level. One of the things that they've been able to do is create a EV purchasing collaborative, an electric vehicle purchasing collaborative. So taking the power of these different cities and bringing them together to bring down the price. So they're able to, purchase at the scale of thousands of electric vehicles and start to convert those fleets and improve local air quality. So that's just one example. But we're going to be doing a lot to continue to push for electric vehicle charging and infrastructure, and to meet with the White House and the Biden administration to lift up local community needs and local community successes.
Wonderful. And you just answered Peter Bella's question. He was wondering how you were going to be working with the White House on energy and clean energy and transportation. So you answered his question. Thank you, Kate. Fan, why don't you talk about what the American Academy of Pediatrics is doing to reach folks and engage them?
Thank you so much. So when we're looking at the American Academy of Pediatrics has about 67,000 members, and we are anxious, and they are anxious to help do the right thing for children. They are, as we talked about, just like faith-based groups and others, they are trusted, actually advocates for children and families. And so one of the things that we look at particularly are education, policy, and advocacy, right? Those are our three big things. It was back in 2007 when we had the first policy statement that came out on environmental health and children. And we're still developing a new one right now, even as we speak, and also looking at a new one that's environmental justice and children's health. So I think that's the policy piece of it, right? So if we're looking at other things, I think that advocacy piece and the education piece is that through ecoAmerica and through all of you, we have a lot of educational tools. We have educational tools for families. Too, if you go to healthychildren.org, there's a whole piece in there on how to talk to your children about what we're talking about today. What's the best way to help them understand it and reassure them? So that's just one more example. And then the final example I'll give is that we actually have climate advocates at every chapter in the Academy, and there are chapters in every state, more than one, and some of the bigger ones. And thanks to Dr. Lori Byron and others, those advocates at our chapter level are anxious to work with all of you. So I think how we look at from a local level and from a state level, and I am telling you, just connecting with them and them connecting with not only Kate's group and Jackie's group, but others, I think that's the way we're going to move forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fan. It's been great to collaborate with you also on the training of those advocates as well. And Jackie, I know that you have some new ideas brewing for the AME Church. Talk about your next phase of engaging your congregations and the congregants.
Thank you. I'm really excited about the networking that can happen even from the three of us being here near the end of Women's History Month. I think it's right on. For us, it really is activating the base, and we know so much happens when women get involved and women take leadership. We're very happy and excited that our Women's Missionary Society, which is the largest group of organized women within our faith group, had a presentation several years ago, and our new president is very excited about getting the women engaged. So that's the grandmas, the great-grandmas, the moms, and the kids, because they have a youth division. And they're going to be very involved in activating the space. And it's one of the primary focuses they have for the next 2 years. And that will inform the work they do going forward. So that is really, Meighen, that's something you planted that is absolutely blooming. We also want to go back and do our survey again, because we were actually surprised, number one, at the number of people who voluntarily took the survey, and again, at the responses it received about levels of interest. And we want to try to gauge, you always want to have some data. You know, what has been the movement of the needle from 2016, when we signed on as the first historically Black denomination to accept the challenge for environmental impact, and what has happened between 2016 and now. We want to make sure that we can get that happening. We also will do asset mapping. Since then, since people have understood, because we see the church is us, not the buildings we worship in. And so how many people who are members of our church who come to churches and local congregations because they saw some environmental push, how many of them do we have? So the asset mapping will determine who are you, where are you, because those may be the matches that we have to work with my two partners here today in local chapters, because they've already caught the vision. They see it as a calling. It's a way for them to merge their daily lives with their faith walk, and that's extremely important. But finally, something always comes when you ask for this prayer. In the San Joaquin Valley, I won't give away their thunder. There is a city that is answering a call that we made to them regarding a foundation that wants to put some clean water filtering systems in. As I was talking about the specific issue of the water, it became obvious to me that again, there were promises made and not kept. This is a city where there was a dump in their community, and the dump was moved, and they were promised that they would get regular reports on the quality of water and the residue from that dump. They've not gotten the reports. And so now the Social Action Commission, which I head, will help this local church go back to its elected officials and hold them accountable. It's important they have an election coming up in June, vote, and then in November. You actually activate the base. So that gets us back doing what we need to do. So I'm looking forward to that local action, which is almost in my backyard because we do national work. But to really use this as a model for how this is not the only one. We knew Flint was just the tip of the iceberg. But now we have a congregation, and these are trusted voices. Most of these people are retired, and they have nothing to lose. And they have a history of having made it. One a police officer, one a principal, all kinds of professions, and one who worked in the dump, who knows what's seeping out there now. So for us right now, it is the actual education, it is the reigniting of the mission, it is the testing to see where we are, to map where we're going in the future.
I mean, it's the interconnection of all of these issues really comes to a head with climate change. But Jackie, you're bringing up such an important point, which is, holding our leaders accountable, right? So making sure that when they make a promise that we hold them to it, right? And our voice and our stepping forward and asking them to keep their promise is so key. And leaders need to hear from us, and we're going to hear about this in some later sessions. They really do need to hear from us. And so no matter if you're someone who's never advocated before or you're a seasoned veteran, it's just a note, like given Jackie's example, that we all need to really step forward and let our leaders know that we expect them to own up to their promises. We just have a minute left, but I want to ask each of you what guidance, quick, short answer guidance that you have for all who are joining today on how they can be part of the solution. How can they be allies in the work that you do? Jackie, why don't we start with you?
I think every day we get up and we rise with a prayer. We have a to-do list. Put something on a to-do list every day that relates to this. It is not just the longevity of life, it is the quality of life for everyone. And when we see some environmental failures, take action. And when you see an AME church, knock on the door, call, and say, I'm ready to work with you.
Wonderful. Fan, why don't you answer this?
What she said. And I think that we just have to educate ourselves, be educated first, know what we need to know, be brave, be caring and collaborative. I was raised in the South, and my mother always said to me, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, Fan. and so I think about being culturally effective and showing how much we care. And then I will say, think about the kids. Think about remember how the children are, and look for ways. Every person wants them to be happy, safe, thriving, and healthy. So use that. Thank you.
Wonderful. And Kate.
Show up at council meetings, support your local elected officials when they're making these hard decisions. They tend to hear from people who are upset with them. Those are the people usually motivated to come. Oftentimes well-resourced people that can track all these different policy actions and sit there for hours. And we need people to show them that climate is important and that they're willing to spend some time to show up and be a part of the solution as well. I think we all think someone else will do it, but this is definitely a, if not you, then who situation. So please show up, support your mayors.
I love that. That's a great cap to this discussion. Show up. And if you're feeling at all hesitant or fearful, remember our neighbors, remember the promises broken, remember the children, and show up. Muster up the energy and know that folks around you are just as concerned and want to engage. And when you engage, you can bring others along with you. So thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Fan. Thank you, Kate. Thank you for sharing your why, showing us your path to leading on climate. And I learned a lot, and I want to thank you for joining us today. And thank you for all that you do to lead on climate. So now that we've established that we are the ones we've been waiting for, let's hear from more leaders about how nature and business can be part of the solution, right after these words from our sponsors.
The American Psychological Association is pleased to continue its longstanding partnership with ecoAmerica and to once again to be a sponsor of the American Climate Leadership Summit. Psychology has several important roles to play as our nation tries to mitigate the effects of climate change and achieve climate justice. Psychologists are developing interventions that build resilience in individuals and communities so that they can maintain their health and well-being in the face of climate change. With expertise in the science of human behavior, psychologists are also helping people and institutions modify their individual behavior and collective practices to reduce the effects of climate change. And as practitioners, researchers, educators, and advocates, psychologists are helping policymakers and the public understand the policies and actions that are needed to make real progress on climate change and climate justice. We at the APA look forward to working with many of you in these efforts so that together we can build a healthier and more just world.
What is vitality? Vitality is life. Vitality is energy. Vitality is passion. Vitality is change. Vitality is vital. But what is vital? Touch is vital. Love is vital. Breath is vital. Food and air and water and soil and nature, the earth is vital. But for who? A vital earth for mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, farmers, fishers, ranchers, teachers, students, snakes, ospreys, zebras, coral, cattle, communities, everyone and everything on earth. Everyone. A vital earth for everyone.
Public lands can help solve the climate crisis, but only if we take bold action now. For too long, public lands have been managed to benefit fossil fuel industries, exposing communities to air and water pollution, harming our health, and contributing to the climate crisis. But it doesn't have to be this way. By phasing out fossil fuel development and tapping into the enormous potential for renewable energy on public lands, we can meet our nation's climate goals and boost our economy. Protecting these incredible forests and wetlands that belong to the public ensure they continue to absorb and store climate-changing emissions. And as our climate changes, connected landscapes provide the infrastructure needed to allow humans and animals to adapt to a changing planet. The time is now to reimagine how public lands can fight the climate crisis and support a more just, equitable, and sustainable future. The health and well-being of current and future communities, wildlife, and our planet depend on it. Public lands are for the people, not polluters. Join the fight.